In May of last year, then CBC reporter Jenny Russell filed a Freedom of Information request to the Canadian Energy Centre, also known as the Alberta Energy War Room, asking for information about contracts that it had let, and the War Room said no. So Ms. Russell went to the ministry and then eventually to the Alberta Privacy Commissioner, and the adjudicator that was appointed released its decision on Monday, and it's got a number of folks in Alberta a bit flummoxed. So I'm going to talk to Professor Sean Fluker, Faculty of Law at the University of Calgary, about that decision. So welcome to the interview, Sean.
Thanks for having me, Markham.
Now, basically, the adjudicator ruled that the Alberta Energy War Room, the Canadian Energy Centre, is just not, even though it's funded by government, the board is chaired by a minister and the board is made up of other cabinet ministers. The public has no right to know what's going on in that organization. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, that's the outcome of the adjudicator's ruling for sure. Yeah.
So how unusual is this?
Well, I think to begin with, really what this raises is really a strategic choice, I think, by the UCP when the War Room was initially constituted, which was to create it as a corporation. I think with the intent to have this outcome, which is to sort of keep its operations outside of the access to information mechanisms.
Okay, but governments are supposed to be accountable for taxpayers' money, and this clearly is not. Now, the center executive director Tom Olson, who is a former journalist, was saying that he defended the decision by saying that the center is audited annually by the provincial auditor general. Does that explanation fly?
Well, I mean, the center also publishes annual reports on its website. So again, it's not necessarily that there isn't some sort of financial or other kind of information available, but the details of the sort that were being sought here aren't going to be made public. And there's all kinds of scenarios where government entities are subject to the Auditor General's review and publish annual reports, but they're still subject to the Freedom of Information Act in Alberta, and all provinces have similar legislation, as does the federal government.
So let's just take a hypothetical. Let's say that there were some unsavory contracts let by the Energy War Room to their political buddies, let's say, and the government, that would be embarrassing for the government, embarrassing for Mr. Olson, and now they can just say no. And doesn't this approach to this make everyone suspicious anyway?
For sure. I mean, the lack of transparency and the silence definitely leads to suspicion. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the most recent annual report on the center's website, I mean, it's running a deficit. My recollection is it reports up to $2 million in spending on communication and research. And so we're talking about a significant amount of money. And so, yeah, absolutely, the silence raises some significant questions.
Is there any precedent for this in other provinces, Sean? Or is this something that's not only unusual, but maybe hasn't been done before?
This issue has arisen in other provinces. One of the complications is that every province's freedom of information legislation differs, and so decisions in those provinces might not necessarily answer the specific legal question, which was before the adjudicator in this case. But for sure, there are cases, judicial decisions in other provinces that have suggested that the mere fact that the government decides to incorporate an agency shouldn't shield it from the scrutiny of a freedom of information request. And the adjudicator in this case certainly has to address some of that law because it was put before them by the applicant. But the adjudicator in this case decided that the legislation in those jurisdictions was sufficiently distinct that it wouldn't apply in this case.
And I would argue that, in fact, this is a case is even more special because the energy war room is, in fact, a propaganda machine for the government, to fund propaganda about the Alberta oil and gas industry. It's, very slanted, often inaccurate. I won't go so far as to say outright lies, but, a kissing cousin. And it's been beset by controversy and it's just a black eye to the Alberta province, but that does seem to be unusual.
Well, the facts here are definitely very, very problematic, and I don't think few will forget. I think it was about a year ago now when the center asked its email subscribers to send messages to Netflix to complain about the family narrated Bigfoot movie. For sure, it's hard not to see that here. And I mean, if you look on the center's website, there certainly is a focus on sort of oil and gas and sort of it's very advocacy slant to it. There's, I think, currently some stories on there that are, borderline attack ads on, the federal minister of the environment. And, it definitely portrays an Alberta that I would say, doesn't reflect the overall consensus in this province, which wants to see Alberta be seen globally as a leader in energy innovation, and a province that recognizes the global push towards a carbon neutral world. And how do we get there? So I mean, this center could be helping us in that regard, but it's not.
Well, final question, Sean, is the CBC now done? Has it pursued all the avenues available to it?
Oh, that's a great question. No, certainly it's not. I mean, it would be open to the applicant, the journalist in this instance, to seek judicial review at the Court of Queen's Bench. And, my reading of the adjudicator's decision is that there's opportunities, I think, to make argument that the adjudicator has committed some errors here in terms of how they have interpreted the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act in Alberta in some key areas. So I would be, I would be surprised if this is the last word. I mean, I would be surprised.
Well, Sean, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me, Mark.